why I said that to you is because over the last 2 days, the interactive process is a learning process. And so Elango and I were talking early morning today, and as I introduced myself to him, he said that Pallav, do you have anything to do with the Pallavans? So it's great for me to fudge that narrative. That I was one of those who sort of moved up, and we came to the north, and I was extolling the virtues of going into the Kanchipuram temple. What a grand facade it is, and inside there's this this sense of infinity within the bounds of those dark walls. And, it's just one of the most impressive architectural wonders that you can come across in the entire world. And that's when Elango sort of brought me down and said that, what the hell, this was just a wastage of money. The money came from the peasantry, and the king was just standing there and sort of projecting his vanity onto this, this marvel of human creation. But it was basically for his own vanity. So which brings me to this beautiful couplet from a poet from Lucknow, Majaz, who was not known to be a revolutionary poet. He was not Faiz or Jalib. He was more known for his sort of bitter ironies that he saw in life. And the couplet goes like this, and it has something to do with my paper. I'm not just sort of fibbing. And he says, यहाँ कितनों को तख्त ताज के अरमा हैं, क्या कहिए? यहाँ, I'll explain it to you in English, hopefully with some integrity. यहाँ कितनों को तख्त ताज के अरमा हैं, क्या कहिए? जहाँ साइल को अक्सर कासाए साइल नहीं मिलता. So in this world, isn't it wondrous that people have such desires for throne and the crown, where a beggar often finds it difficult to get a begging bowl. And that's what Elango reminded me of. And that's what this whole Jaddojahad, Kashmakash with power is all about. So I've tried to build my paper on power. Ab aap mera mut shuru.
You're not as answerable to me as I am to ask you.
I've known him for next year. I would have known him for 50 years. So. So I built it around a very sort of austere and yet tenable definition of power, which Robert Dahl sort of manufactured, and I'm not particularly impressed by Robert Dahl. And it's not just that I counted him in because he's easy to demolish, but it's just that it's in compared to say Foucault and compared to others, where power forms this sort of mystical force which you can't really pin down. Robert Dahl has a very, very pedestrian definition of power. He says that A has power over B to the extent that he can get B to do something that B would not otherwise do. Now that is simple. You can understand the cold logic of power in it. That the B's compulsion of complying to the will of A, acutely aware of the negative consequences of non-compliance. And that's the cold logic of power traditionally understood by societies. And in my paper, what I've done is that I've looked at collective interactions rather than personal tussles of power within families or within religion, between God and man. And what I've done is that I've confined myself to how collectives of one group of people and collectives of another group of people determine their power relationships and what that future would look like if the inequality inherent in those relationships could be addressed or changed and then sort of revolutionized. So looking at Dahl, power is a relational concept. It operates within the societal structure, and people's location within the structure defines their access to power. And it's an unequivocal expression of inequality. I mean, it's marked by a marked sense of inequality. And power expresses itself through wealth, through status, through education, influence. And it's sustained, and even through raw muscle, and it's sustained through manipulation of thought, coercion, co-option, deception, inducements, fear, threat of violence, and use of an existing advantageous position to ensure continued dominance. And so it's a narrative of just sort of battering down, cutting down, imposing the will, and reducing the other person to a non-entity at the worst form of it. And power is expressed through structural violence. Power can also be expressed through real physical violence. But some really good work was done by Johan Galton of Norway, a mathematician and a sociologist. And he says that relationships of power over time get fused into the structure of the society, and its power is expressed through ideas, inducements, and punitive action. And essentially, power is exercised by those who control material resources. And the disempowered are marginalized, exploited, degraded, debased, without really experiencing physical violence. And it's possible to do that. We know that it's possible to do that. We see it around us all the time. And Galton calls this the state of structural violence, where a complete social psychological impairment is induced into the disempowered group, and which was something which had already been expressed by Dr. Ambedkar when he talked about the caste system. And he says that Dr. Ambedkar says the caste is a state of mind; it is a disease of mind. The teachings of the Hindu religion are the root cause of this disease. We practice casteism and we observe untouchability because we are enjoined to do so by the Hindu religion. So while the degradation of the Dalits represents the most perverse form of inequality within power relations, many other kinds of dichotomies are obviously identifiable in contemporary Indian context. Whether it is corporate versus minimum wage labor, rich landowner versus landless farm worker, bureaucrat versus common citizen, educated versus the illiterate or minimally educated, politician versus the common voter, man versus woman, majority versus minority, center versus peripheral, city versus village, developed versus left out of development. And so, in all of these, obviously, the level of inequality varies. There is a certain level of inequality between the educated and the illiterate, or the man versus woman, developed versus left out of development, and yet all of them are predicated on the notion of inequality. So I personally think, now that I'm supposed to project it into the future, I personally think that this is dysfunctional, unethical, unjust, and I'm not the first one to think of it like that. I would like to believe that I belong to a certain tradition which comes down from Marx to Gandhi to Lohia to JP to Ambedkar to all of these people who've thought about this and tried to undo it, tried to project their views into the future. And what I really liked was a contemporary interpretation of how to understand what are the possibilities from a very not so well-known Irish Marxist sociologist, John Holloway, whose book young kids carried in their pockets when they were trying to raise the banner against globalization in Seattle and in the 90s and early 2000s. And he talks about cracks in the system. He studied the Zapatista movement in Mexico, and he basically explains his distrust for conventional revolutionary trajectory towards change by looking at two different interpretations of power in the Spanish language as understood by the Zapatistas. He said, poder hacer, or the power to create, to do, versus poder sobre, or the power over, the power of domination and subjugation, which stifles the power of the people to create. So on the basis of that, I'm going to, basically ignore what I've written after all this. And I'm going to talk about and take ownership of the future that I thought would take care of the power issues, at least in India, as encouraged by Ashish. So this was a very tough task for me because, you need to project something into the future which is rather intangible, and yet you need to take ownership of it. And so, to paraphrase Robert Dahl, I would say that A would exercise no power over B in pursuit of any task, and vice versa, yet the two would form a relationship of equality, reciprocity, and sharing, where all the necessary tasks of their lives get done under the rubric of mutual care. Again, something which is not terribly original on my part. So what would it look like in the power and the political economy? So the essential logic of economic activity would be the fulfillment of livelihood needs and not the logic of accumulation. Cooperative forms of production would be the basis of industry. Banks and financial institutions would also be cooperatively owned and would work on behalf of the people. The chief economic unit would be an eco-region, roughly similar to a current small state in India. It would be created on the basis of its common ecological and geographical features. And all eco-regions would be small units comprising not more than 10 current districts. Large contiguous tracts of similar ecological and geographical features would be divided into smaller units. All economic activity would be guided by the larger goal of maintaining environmental equilibrium, and all industrial and production activity would have to submit itself to periodic public audits. All eco-regions would proactively ensure that no economic activity becomes over-industrialized and depersonalized. Economic activity would not be guided by the notion of endless growth. In fact, whenever a situation warrants it, degrowth would be introduced to bring an industry or production unit back to equilibrium through downscaling production, ensuring consumption which is need-based. In terms of power and the political structures, in a politically egalitarian India, all formal structures of decision-making, as far as possible, would be formed on the basis of direct democracy. Institutions formed by representational elections would be downwardly accountable to those groups and people they are representing. All elected bodies would be completely transparent and would work under the oversight of watchdog committees. All elected offices would be restricted to 2 terms, that they would not be successive. You would have to give yourself a break of at least 1 term before trying for another. And no elected or representational office would be for more than 2 years. The expenditure for elections would be through a collective fund, and every candidate would have access to an equal amount. All offices would submit to a right to recall halfway through a term if a minimum agreed upon number of people were to ask for that option to be explored. All electorate chambers would have equal representation for women and men. In terms of social structure, all citizens in the country would be considered equal in their legal, economic, and social status. All communities would be considered equal. No traditional notions of racial superiority of communities or religious group would be accepted in the social or legal spheres. There would be legal sanctions and penalties for any expression of practice or practice of discrimination based on community association. Both sexes would have equal social and legal status. They would have access to equal opportunities for education and employment. Religious beliefs would be strictly personal but not be allowed to influence public decision-making process. The family unit would be encouraged not to be guided by any residual patriarchal influence. Female as well as male role models would be encouraged to be followed and emulated by the youth and the kids. Social practices would encourage ecological humanism and a decentralized existence based on equality and peaceful coexistence. One of the things which one thing which I've skipped here is my discussion on violence, but I'd be willing to talk about it in the discussion. That basically is what I've built this paper around, and I'm glad that I'm in the company of those who are already working in the area of power. In all our interactions, everywhere we go, everywhere we interact, everywhere we act as a human being, we are confounded either by our lack of power or by our large control of power in all our interactions, and our integrity asks us to confront ourselves on that. Thank you.
I want to make 3 points, Pallav. The first is, I think there's a problem with Dahl's definition. It's quite a serious one, especially in the Indian context. If you say that A exercises power over B only if A can make B do things B would not otherwise do, it creates the following problem, which the moment I say it will be very obvious to you. Because of the socialization of consciousness and habit formation, so much of the time, especially in a context like India, people would want to do things for you, even when you don't want them to do those things for you, right? So when you're talking about interrogating one's own integrity vis-a-vis power exercised involuntarily or structurally over others, Dahl is coming from a highly individualized context of the United States. That's not our situation here. And this is one of the biggest puzzles that one has to face, actually. There's a lot more to be said about this, but I'll just say this. The second point, which I feel is very important to recognize, is if one thinks of a future which will abolish power, and I'm looking at Aditya because he mentioned anarchism yesterday, with what do you abolish power? You cannot abolish power with power. So obviously there's something else you need to bring in, right? Nietzsche once said, one who looks into the abyss should be careful because the abyss also looks back into him. So that's the old ancient riddle of power. So finally, in order to solve this riddle, I feel one has to distinguish very clearly, very, very clearly, between power and freedom. And this the West has not understood. I'm putting it bluntly, but by and large the West has not understood. Power, putting it very simply, is a zero-sum game. My gain is your loss, or this community's gain is that community's loss. Freedom is inevitably a positive-sum game. And the simplest way to understand it, I'm making it slightly crude in order to make it clear, I used to teach this to students. If you lock up a peasant in you rob his land and you lock him up in his home, the power of the peasant is clearly lower, your power is clearly greater. But as far as freedom is concerned, it's highly contentious as to whether the person who's exercising power over that peasant is free or not. Because psychologically, you will become terribly unfree the moment you get the thought as to what the peasant might do when he gets out of the homestead. So Israel, Palestine, etc.
Thank you.
One very sectarian congratulations as a Lohiite. It's in direct continuity of Lohia tradition, and it's written quite in a non-Lohiite slogan raising, free of rhetoric. So I must congratulate you on that. The way you have discussed in the paper referring to John Galtung on the power of ideas, how to sustain the power relationship, that point needs to be probably amplified, because the socialist movement was on margin post-independence era, and the goals it had set for itself, it has already achieved in Bihar. So neither that power of the socialist movement, especially led by Lohia, but locating himself in the same tradition as you have located Gandhi, Marx and all that, Ambedkar included. Lohia also located himself in that, but the limitations of that paradigm, when CSP in 1934 drafted its program, it sent to Gandhiji, and Gandhiji said, I'll sign it and endorse it, provided you believe that you believe in God, that's all. So he was willing to sign in that. So for the purposes of this book, it's a nearly perfect paper, except the which is supposed to be core in Ashish's eye, the conclusions are very specific and they make the paper tame. I would rather say that on the values and on the dreams, if you bring them in, what Swaraj means, what moksha means to Gandhi, the worship of Dalit Narayan and empowerment of Dalit Narayan, those issues have to be part of that. And what values like Ekadashvrat, what would become the feasible practices at the societal level. And the violence part also you have discussed very well, but that also needs to be amplified a bit more. Medha Lekha example is good, but the whole two things are missing. One, the spiritual role of spirituality, spiritual power to change the power structures, and Bhakti movement is a good example, and the role of moral power. Both are sometimes in this, for secularists they are separate, but for some they are together.
It seems that what is said would mean non-existence of the family, any form of the state or state machinery, and any structure for that matter, any socially created structure. Then, as already been pointed out, that what would replace. So there can be only a relation of love between people, and at that level it would take us to at least to quasi-religion. Maybe not to the actual religion, but love cannot be an abstract relation. It has to have, again, it has to have some kind of a medium. So, if that is the thing which connects people, instead of these things, then it has to be explored and spread out. I think, I don't know what you think about it.
I think, what you said, Asim, about the lack of personal intervention in being able to define one's relationship in power, if that's how I understand what you were trying to say, is also an assumption within the equation that Dahl creates. The lack of initiative or lack of agency of B vis-a-vis A, and the assumption of his or her own powerlessness is part of the also the surrender of agency. Also the surrender of agency or the lack of agency. I would regard them as both being the same. And that in itself is a critical part of the equation. And I think that's why the equation is so cold in its logic that I think it transcends the boundaries of societies. That's how I look at it. I mean, we can discuss it later. And I think that, to replace power, what is the alternative that we are looking at? I think what we are looking at least in the medium term, is removing the concentration of power. And so ultimately, we are not, we are looking at not the complete abolition of power, because that means that we are looking at a stateless society. We know that what happened to those experiments. Gillas's whole analysis of new class in the then Yugoslavia tells us, how the political class and political control, the whole notion of political control, in fact became a form of property in itself. So I don't think I would go to the extent of saying that I'm comfortable with the idea of complete abolition of power. What I'm saying is I would love to look at a situation in which there is no concentration of power, and so is abolition of power the same? Intervention at the concentration of power the same as freedom? Maybe. I'm not certain about that. I haven't really looked at removal of concentration of power as freedom. Total freedom, I have 2 minutes. Total freedom could mean lack of abolition of concentration of power, and that is something which will happen through an evolutionary process. I don't think we can impose the terms of that process on anybody. Then, शुक्रिया विजय जी, आप मेरे अग्रज हैं और आपकी तरफ से जो मुबारकबाद मिलती है उसका मैं कदर करता हूँ. और as far as individual, spiritual, moral power is concerned, these are such abstract notions that I find them to be. I find it difficult to wrap my head around them, and which obviously doesn't mean that I don't want to take up that challenge. Maybe I will, depending on how much leeway Ashish will give me in terms of the word limits that he's imposed on us. But I'll definitely give it a stab. And as far as Bharatji, as far as individual and love and is my projection of future toying with the idea of love? If it is, then I need to be cautious about that. Thank you for pointing that out. But I don't think so. But if I am falling into that pitfall, I'll certainly try to emerge out of it. But I don't think that the nature of love and the power relationships within love will be satisfactorily addressed by society. I think those tensions will continue to challenge us all through our existence. I don't think the society should or society will be able to address those conflicts and challenges and tensions. Yeah.
Thank you so much. The next paper is by you.